Hello. In this first video I'm going to be going over the basics of Blender. As you can see here we have a small scene that has a very basic object in it. I'll be going over how to create something like this tree I have here that has some interesting shading going on. It's a very low poly object, easy to make, and I'll also be introducing you to some of the controls here that exist in Blender. This version of Blender that I'm using is Blender 2.8, the most recent version that exists. It can be downloaded from blender.org. You can find that online. There's Windows and Mac installers out there, so feel free to find that, download it, and begin using it. So we're going to start with a new scene. So when you open up Blender, you'll likely see something like this. Okay. The easiest way to clear your scene is to select all the objects in the scene by pressing A, and everything will be outlined in orange. Alright. Now you can press delete and that'll remove everything. So now we have an empty scene. Now your default scene can be set up in your preferences, however we're not going to cover that right now. It's just easiest to delete your default scene to get a clean scene like that for now. So to start off with some basic controls here, we have our toolbar on the side here, and this allows you to manipulate objects. We have our controls over here. These are everything that has to do with your scene or your object that you're currently looking at. There's many different menus here, and we'll go into depth about some of the things that those do. At the top, we have a longer bar here that controls what's going on in this window. So you'll notice there's many different windows on the screen right now. So this window up here is the editor type, and you can see I can change this to lots of different windows. We're not going to go over all these right now. However, you can see there's many different ones that we can use. However, the 3D viewport is going to be very useful for us. At the bottom we have the timeline, which is useful for animation. Up here we have our hierarchy, and the hierarchy shows you all the objects that are in your scene. And like I said, this is your window that's going to show you all the properties of your scene. You can add or remove windows by clicking on the corner of one and dragging over. So you can see now we have two of these, so if I wanted image editor as well, I can do that. But we're not going to worry about that. So in order to remove one, you just click in the top corner and drag it over to the side to remove it. So we want to add an object here. So we're going to start off by adding a basic mesh. Right? There's lots of different things in here you can add, but we're just going to add a circle for now. So that gives us a circle. Down here, it'll give you properties of adding that circle. If you click here, these are the things about creating that circle. So if I want to create a triangle, I can hit 3, and you can see there's 3 sides there. We're going to do 16, so that it's, approximately, actually we'll do 24. It's a little bit more tight of a circle. Once you click off of that with Alt-A, which will deselect all, or click on a different object in the scene, you won't see any more properties. You can't manipulate those by creation anymore. So for example, if I were to add this circle in and then deselect it, I lose the option to change anything about that. So I have to now manually change whatever I want about it. But that's okay. I'll show you how to do that. To look around your scene, you can hold middle mouse button and move your mouse, and that'll allow you to rotate. If you hold shift and middle mouse, you can move your scene back and forth or up and down. Scroll wheel will scroll you out, and the left click button will allow you to select objects like that. So if we zoom back in on our circle that we just created, and we go up here to the editor window, we select our circle by right-clicking on it. You can go into edit mode, and this will show you the circle in edit mode. There's three different ways to view our circle. We have our vertex selector. You can see all the vertexes, and I'm going to deselect those with Alt-A. Okay, so we have all the vertexes. This will show us all the edges, so if I select an edge like that with a right click, you can see these are all my different edges. And we can select faces, but there are currently no faces because I just created a simple circle. So if we go into vertex mode again, and I select A will select all of my vertices. A very handy tool if you want to connect vertices together and form a face is to press F. That'll then give us a face. So now we have a circle that has a face on it. Alright. What we can do with this is lots of different things. So if I select one vertice with right click again, and I go over here to the Move tool, you can see I now have three different handles to work with. So this controls your X, Y, and Z axis. So I can drag this and pull these vertices however I want. You can see now I have a little cut out of my circle there. I can grab this one and pull it too if I'd like. This one. If you hold with left click on one of the vertices and then you press a value like 1, it'll move that 1 unit in that direction. If you do it again, do -1, you can see it goes right back to where it was. Clicking on View up here will bring us to the sidebar, where you can then see the exact location of the vertex that you have selected. So if I want these to be in an exact position, like this one's at 0, 1, I can bring this to 0, 0. Put it in the center, or put it at 1, 0 on the end, or -1 to put it back over there. Now these ones are currently having some face clipping issues, which is why this looks really shaded weird. So if I pull these back out, that fixes that issue. You can leave them in like that. Because of the way I was manipulating it, Blender was having a hard time updating, so you just have to update that. That sometimes happens. So those are how you manipulate singles, but let's say I want to grab a group of vertices. Now, like I said before, if we do Alt-A and then hold Control, oh, I didn't actually mention this before, but I'll mention it now. If you press Control and hold that, and then click left mouse, you'll get to draw a line, and you can select all the things you want to. So you can see now I have all of these vertices selected. The nice thing about this is that this will translate over into edges too if I want. So I have these selected, but let's say I actually wanted the edges. Now you can see that little orange bit. I just have those edges selected, and I go back to vertices. If I select faces, it won't do anything. And now I've lost that. So let's select those again. Control, left mouse. And now I can do the same things I was doing before. I can pull these in and out, move them up and down, whatever I'd like to do. The way to undo things, like many programs, is Control-Z. So press Control-Z and that'll bring it back to where it was if you do something that you didn't want to. And there's a few different operations we can perform on these. So this is a translation, so we can move these over. We can scale them, so you can use this scaler here. And again, it has 3 handles. If you press and hold in the middle, it'll control all 3 at once. And you can see I'm getting weird things going on because we don't want to scale this on all 3 axes. Let's say we just want to scale this on one axis, you could grab the green handle. Alternatively, you can just press S and it'll do the same thing. Now S will control it on all the axes again. So if we want to do it just on the X axis, after pressing the S like that and having it in this limbo mode, you can press X and then it'll lock it to only scale on the X axis. can do that with the y-axis and the z-axis as well. The last thing we can do is rotate. So this would be the rotate tool. And again, you can pull any of these handles. You can type in an exact amount, 45 degrees, something like that. And again, you can rotate it with R on the keyboard. Just lost my bar. Bring the toolbar back up here. If you ever lose the toolbar or the sidebar, they can be found under View. So yeah, again, you can rotate these, and scale them and translate them. This gizmo here will allow you to do all three of those operations with one gizmo. I like to keep it on the translation one, and then use R and S for keyboard shortcuts, but that's just my own preference. So, we have a few different ways to manipulate these things. I'm going to create a fresh circle here that doesn't have these broken items out of it so that we can see what we're working with, and I can demonstrate something else. So we're going to go back into object mode up here, and that'll let us go to our objects. Now if you look over in the hierarchy, like I mentioned before, this shows us all of our objects in the scene. So we have a circle here. The circle is selected, and that's in orange. If I press Alt-A, that deselects everything, and now I don't have a circle anymore. Now I selected the circle again, I'll press delete on the keyboard, it'll remove that. Again, if I say, oh, I didn't want to do that, Control-Z will bring it back. So we're going to add another circle. So we have a fresh one here. Into edit mode, press F. That'll give us a nice face on our circle. Now what we're going to do is select multiple vertices and manipulate them a few different ways. So you can hold Shift and select different vertices on the circle. This will allow you to get the exact ones that you want. If you want to get successive ones, again I'll press Alt-A to deselect. Let's say I want this vertice to this vertice. I can hold Control and click on that one, and it'll bring all the ones in between on the shortest path. So a lot of times this will be what you want, but sometimes you'll get the wrong path and you'll have to actually manually do it with Shift. For this example, I'm just going to use these four here. Alright. And if we scale these out with S, you can see that it pulls them out or pulls them in, and we're getting some symmetry because I selected the proper ones. Now, this is fantastic. We can do a lot of things with this, but it's not always useful to do it how we want it to. This tool up here allows you to change your pivot point. So if I want to scale all of these based on their own spots, so if I press, now that I switched this to individual origins, if I press scale again, you can see nothing's happening. That's because they're single points. So you can't scale a single point up because it's a single point. It's 0, 0, 0 essentially. So what it's doing before with this median point is determining the center of everything that's here and then scaling it based on that spot. You can see there's a small circle in the middle there, and that's actually our cursor. At any point in time, you can click with left mouse on the screen and move that cursor around. You can see I now have it over here, wherever. So we put it over here. And again, you should be able to change that somewhere in here if you want to get an exact location. However, we're not going to worry about that right now. So we have this cursor up here, and we can also scale based on that, or translate or do whatever we need to. So you select 3D cursor, and then we scale, and you can see they're all moving based on where that cursor is. This is really useful for some things. Not easy to demonstrate with just a circle like this, but it can be very useful. So we're going to go back to median point, and now let's say I want to move my cursor back, because you'll see if I add another circle, it now adds it at this point, and I don't want that circle up there because that's in a bad spot. So I'm going to press Control-Z, and then I'm going to press Shift S. Okay, hold Shift down while you do this, and this brings up this nice menu. So what we can do is move objects to other snap points. So we can snap things to the grid, we can put them back at the world origin, so on and so forth. So what we're going to do right now is put the cursor back at the world origin. You can see it puts that right back in the place that we want it. Alright, so with this circle, we're going to do a few things to it. So we're going to select all of our vertices again. I just pressed A to get everything. And we're going to press E. E is the extrude command. So this will pull our circle up into a cylinder. Until you click, it won't do anything. If we want to extrude it an exact amount, like we translate or something, I could press 2, and that'll bring it up to 2. I can do 1.2. I can do 0.8, whatever you're fancying. For now, I'm just going to put it at 1. So now we have a cylinder instead of just a circle. A handy function that can be done on a lot of faces is that if we just select this face like I had before, and we press extrude, and again you'll have this going on, and then we just don't click again. You just right click. You'll say, oh, nothing happened. Something actually did happen. It extruded it at a height of 0. So then if we scale this down, you'll see that I actually have a circle on top that's connected to the circle before, so I can put a ring inside of what I had before. Then I can extrude this down again and scale it in a bit. You can see I'm already getting a little bit of interesting geometry just with a few little functions using the scale and extrude. A very common thing to do would be to do ring cuts. So if I want to cut around a box or a cylinder or something, I can press Ctrl R and select the face that I want. You can see that it's moving around, trying to figure out what you're pointing at. We're going to do it on the outside here. And as you scroll, you can add more and more cuts to whatever you want. So we're just going to cut it a couple times. And then you'll press left mouse, and then it gives you this option to slide it. If you just press right mouse, it'll put it in the exact place that it would keep all of these in the same size. So then what we can do is select faces, and there's this handy feature where you can select rings with Alt. So we can do this with vertices as well. If I press Alt while clicking on this edge, it should select this entire thing here, as you see. If you do Shift Alt, you can select multiple edges, like that. Okay, so we're going to press Alt here, and then if I click off, you can see there's nothing because I was going for faces. So if we click on this edge, it'll select all these faces, Shift Alt, all these faces. This is really useful for getting the geometries that you're looking for. So if we wanted to extrude this, we could just select those faces, press E, and bring that out. Go into object mode. You can see that there's a lot going on here. You can see all these faces. It doesn't necessarily look the best because we only have 24 faces on the outside. So what we can do is go into Object up here, under the Object Mode menu. Remember, we go back to Object Mode, and go to Shade Smooth or Shade Flat. This is currently shaded flat. If we click on Shade Smooth, you can see that it will make all those edges go away. However, this also doesn't look that impressive. You can see there's no hard edges on here. That's not necessarily what we were going for. Objects can have modifiers applied to them. There's a lot of different modifiers in this menu over here under Properties, so whatever object we have selected, currently our circle, which is now a cylinder, I'm going to rename this. So we can go up here, name this Cylinder. Perfect. Alright, so in the modifier menu for our new cylinder, we can go to Add Modifiers. Now, there's a lot of different things in here, some which you probably will never use. What we're going to use to make this look a little nicer is something called an edge split. Just by clicking on the edge split with the default settings, you can see that improved it tenfold. We can control our angle. So right now it's set to 30. So any angle that is beyond 30 will make this work. So if I bring this down, you can see nothing happens until I get way down there to 15. If I go up, you can see that it starts to shade it up like what we looked before until we get to what we saw before, because we're over all those degrees. We bring this down. This looks nice. Bring it way down, you'll start to get some changes. But we'll just leave that at 30 like it was. You can see we get this nice looking object without having that many faces. You can see some properties down here. You can say this is our cylinder. It has 296 vertices, 154 faces, and 348 triangles. One object. So keeping objects lower poly and using things like an edge split can help you save on memory and rendering. So a common mistake some people will do is something called subdivisions. I'll get into subdivisions at some point. However, subdivisions is essentially breaking faces up into many smaller faces. So you can get more detail out of things, but at the expense of memory and overhead processing. That's why it's very useful to use something like an edge split. So we have our simple little object here. So what we're going to do is remove this, and I'm going to show you how to make the tree that we had before, using all the things that I've just taught you. So what we're going to do is delete what we have, and again we're going to add another circle. I'm going to scale this down by pressing S and just bring it down a little. I'm going to eyeball this. I'm not using exact dimensions. It's a little artistic freedom. Go into edit mode, go into vertice mode, and everything's already selected, which is perfect. So I'm going to press F, make a face, press E to extrude it. We'll bring it up just a tad like that. This will be the trunk of our tree. We'll press E again, and then we'll right click off of that so that it does what we were doing with the circles. Now, like you can do and scale this in with S, you can also scale it out. You'll get some weird looking faces unless you extrude it again. So we scaled this, and you can see there's some clipping issues going on with this because we have two faces sitting right on top of each other. Once we extrude this, that no longer happens. That face has just been extruded out further, so it's no longer sitting on top of the other. So we're going to bring this up a little bit. We're going to press S, scale this in, E again, right click, press S to scale it out, click, E to extrude again. We'll make it a little smaller this time, scale it in more, look around, press E again, right click, scale it out a tad, E to extrude, and we'll scale that in one last time. Now, you can see our tree has a flat top. Most trees don't have a flat top. So to fix this, we can use the merge command. Okay, that can be found under Vertex. So at the top, once you have your vertexes selected that you like, you can go into Vertex and merge vertices. You can also press Alt-M, you see here is the keyboard command. And then it'll come up with this small menu. Do you want to merge them at the center, at the cursor, which is down here? Or do you want to collapse them? We're not going to want to collapse them. That's a little bit different than doing it at the center, but we're just going to do it at the center this time. So that'll do it at the center of all of our vertices. And now we just have one vert right there. We'll drag that up a little bit. Let me zoom out and look at our tree. And I'm not terribly happy with the proportions. So what we're going to do again is press Alt-A to deselect everything. Press Alt on this edge to select that. Shift-Alt, select that one. And I'm just going to scale these in a little bit. We're going to do that with the top as well. So Alt, Shift-Alt, scale that in as well. Alright, so our tree is starting to look a little nicer. I also think our trunk is a little bit fat, so we're going to grab these two, and if I scale this, you can see that it's pulling this down, and our trunk is no longer sitting on the ground. There's a few ways to fix this, so I'm going to undo that. If we go into edge mode, we can just select these edges, and that'll leave these edges the same size. So if we scale those on their individual origins instead of the median point, then it just scales them in how we want it to. That's what we expected. Okay, looking much better. So next, we're going to pull these leaves down so we get some interesting geometry. So I'm going to select every other vertex around the bottom of the tree here. I'm holding Shift and just right-clicking on the vertices. Just going to bring the blue handle, pull it down, and then I'm going to scale it out on the median point so that it's at the center of those. If this were individual, you can see if I scale it on the individual origins, it does nothing because they're all just points. If I scale it on the median point, then we can bring them out a little bit, and you can see we get some little pointed looking leaves at the bottom there. And we're going to do that on the next tier as well, but I'm going to stagger them. So I'm going to grab this one and do the same thing I did with the bottom row, shift clicking with right mouse to grab every other vertex. And again, we'll just drag those down a little bit, scale them out. And then in the top tier again, we'll stagger. So just select, shift right mouse, and there we go. Drag them down and scale them out just a little bit. Like that. Alright, go into object mode to check out what we got. Looking pretty good. Now again, if we select this and shade it smooth, you can see that it starts to look pretty awful. You got some weird shading going on. So we're going to go back over here and apply our edge split modifier. You can see it's really smooth, but we want a little bit of texture. So I'm just going to drag this until I find where I want it. So we're going to bring it down right there. You can see now I have some edges, but not every edge like that. So I just have some of these edges that I'm looking for. But our trunk has all the edges, so we don't want that. So what we're going to do is go back into edit mode and select what we want to separate off of this object and make it a different object. So I'm going to Alt-A just in case I had anything selected. Then I'm going to press Alt here and Shift-Alt here, and that selects all my vertices there. Now if you press P on the keyboard, that brings up a separation menu, and we're going to separate this by the selection, what we have selected. And then that creates a separate object for that. So if we go into object mode, you can see I now have a tree and a trunk. Both objects exist, and I can select both of them. But what we want to do is fix this so this is a solid object. So first off, we'll go to our trunk here. I'm going to rename it trunk. You can double click on that to rename that. We're going to name this tree. And this eye here will toggle the visibility. So if I click on this, then you no longer see the trunk. So we're going to go back in here to edit mode, Alt to select our circle there, and press F to put a face there. So now that's a solid object again. And we're going to do the same thing with the trunk. We're going to put a solid face on the top here. So we select our trunk, go into edit mode, press Alt and F to put a face on it. Go back to object mode, show both of our objects. Now you can see when I separated these objects, they both retained their edge split modifier. We just need to drag this one up a bit so that you don't see those harsh edges anymore. And all of a sudden we have a fairly nice trunk on our tree. If I want to put a little bit of a lip at the bottom, I can by doing Control R, and we'll just put one ring in there. one ring cut, and we'll drag it down, click, and then we'll expand out this bottom layer by clicking Alt to select it all, and then scaling it with S just a tad, so that we now have just a little bit of a bottom on the tree there. So, if we go into our material mode, you can see there are no materials on our tree. It's just a white diffuse tree. If we go into rendered mode, you can see there's also nothing going on because there's no lighting in the scene and there's nothing to reflect off of or no materials to work with. So I like to work on materials in material mode, which is these different menus up here. We have wireframe, which shows you your wireframe of the objects in the scene. Your standard mode, which is what we were in before, which is good for modeling. Material mode, which you can also model in, but it'll allow you to also see different materials. And then rendered mode, which is good for trying to see what your scene is going to look like. There's a few different rendering engines in this menu right here. The context scene. It's going to be currently set up for Eevee, and Eevee is a good one to work with if you don't have a dedicated graphics card in your computer. Eevee runs off of your CPU, and it's a physically based rendering system, PBR, if you've ever heard that term. So this is going to, or physically based shading is another term. So this is going to be determining all these things based on real-time updates. Cycles is a little more intensive. You can see that when I changed it to that, it had to update and it went in. There's two different ways to run cycles. You can run it in CPU mode and GPU compute mode. Now GPU compute mode is going to be much faster in cycles. However, if you don't have a dedicated graphics card, like I said, that's probably not going to be the best option for you. Materials between cycles and Eevee are, for the most part, the same. So you can work on them in either or. However, they just may look a bit different due to the way that they're rendered. So we're going to go back to Eevee. And this menu down here is our materials. So you can see, if I select my tree, I'm going to go back to material mode because we're in render mode, that we don't have any materials here. If I click on this menu, you can see I just have a standard material, and I can select that. So this is our first material. We just assigned it to our tree. So the entire tree part has that material. Over here we can change our values, like our color and our specular. See, if I bring specular down, that's the it's a type of reflectivity. It's different from the metallic reflectivity. This makes things, they work a little bit differently. Specular is an older shading technique that we still use today in a lot of things. So we're going to drag this color to a greenish color. You can change your exact values. You can put a hex color in. You can change your RGB values. So we're just going to bring this into the green, and I'm going to drag this down to get us a darker green like that. Bring our specular way down to get us more of a tree look. Not quite all the way, so we have a little bit of a gloss. You can see right here on the tree as I move it around, there's a little bit going on there, but not too much. Again, if I drag that way back up, you can see it's very shiny. We don't want that. Trees don't look like that. So that's how we make a material. And then if we want to do it on the trunk, let's select the trunk, and we look at our materials. We only have what we just made, material. So I'm going to make a new material by clicking on New. And we're going to rename it as well. You can rename any material at any time by selecting it here and putting a name in. So we're going to name this Tree Trunk. So the tree trunk material is going to be brown. So let's bring that down into this orangish green area. And you can see, yeah, that's not quite brown, but if we bring our darkness way down, there we go, we're getting some darkness. Again, we'll bring our specular way down to about there. Alt-A to deselect. You can see we have our tree. Let's say we wanted to add some highlights to our tree. It's kind of boring just having a totally solid tree. Now you can texture and do things, however we're not going to go over that today. I'm just going to show you how to select different areas on your tree. So if we look down like this, get a good view, press, oh, not on the trunk. Let's select the tree, go into edit mode, and we're going to select edges, and we want to select this area, and we press point button, the vertex button, and then we get just those two rings. Now you could do it also with Shift Alt, so if I wanted to select these two, that's great, but let's say I wanted to color the bottoms of all of these. You can see it just selected that, and we don't necessarily want that. A few ways to fix that are just to work with one section at a time, or you could put a ring cut in there and then it won't contiguously connect those. We're just going to work with one at a time. So let's say we want to recolor this. I'm going to go over here to where we have our materials and press this, and this will add another material slot to our object. It doesn't add a new material, it just adds another slot. So now we have two different materials available to put on our object. And let's say we want to make this a darker green, but we don't want to make a whole new material. We can select our material we had before, and then click this button right here, New Material. This will copy what we had before, so now you can see we have both of these in here. And I'm going to name this dark green. Oh, for some reason my keyboard switched to Cyrillic, so I'm going to go back and let's try that again. Dark green. And I'm just going to rename this one to green so we don't have the confusion anymore. There. So this is going to be our darker green, and all I'm going to do is just bring this down to that. Now if we go into object mode, you can see nothing really happened. It does look darker on the bottom, but that's just because of the way that the shading is happening in the scene. If we go into edit mode, you have to assign this. So see, assign active material slot to selection. So you can see we have the selected part underneath, so if I press assign, you can see there that it changed that, so now that's actually darker like that. So we're going to do that with all three rings. Assign, Alt, Shift Alt, assign. There we go. So now we have some darker green underneath. Go into object mode. There we go, just like that. So that's how you put multiple materials on the same object. Now, this typical setup here for materials is called the principled shader, and it's very useful. You can do a lot of different things with the principled shader. However, using things to plug into all these values, which is more advanced, we're not going to go over that right now, is doable, and that would be doable through the shader editor. So if I was to pull open a new window like I showed you before, we grab the corner like that, and then I just pulled over. We're going to go here into the shader editor, and you can see here I have the same thing here because we're on the dark green material, and if you've ever been introduced to a node-based material system or something similar, you can see all these different points where we can add different things and plug them in to make very advanced looking materials. Again, I'm not going to go over that. It's just an introduction so that you know that it's an availability. So we'll go back, 3D viewport, and we'll just close that window up because we're not going to be using the shader editor today. So that's how you make your tree. Now if I wanted to look at this in render view, you can see it's very dark. That's because there's no light in this scene. So if I press Alt-A to deselect everything, and then I go to Add, we can go down here to Light, and there's a few different types of light: point, sun, spot, and area. Sun will give you a lot of light, and it's directional, so that's not a bad idea. So let's add one of those. You can see it added our lamp down here. And it does not matter where the sun is in a scene, because the sun works in every single direction. It just matters on the way that it's pointed like this. So if we want to rotate our sun, you can see it's changing the lighting in the scene. you can see it's pointed in that direction like that, so we're getting some lighting in our tree. So that's a nice way to get some lighting in our scene. And let's say we wanted to have a few more trees. So what we can do is we can select both of these with Shift, and we can do a Shift S, or sorry, a Shift D, and that will duplicate our object for us. And then it'll let us free drag it, but let's say we want it on the same plane. So again, like with extrusion, if you just right click, it duplicated it, but it doesn't look like it because it just put it in the same place. So we're just going to drag that second tree over and bring it over here a little bit maybe. This isn't the most efficient way to select very complex objects. In this case, we only had two things that we were working with. I'm going to delete this and show you a separate way that this can be done. So let's say that we want this point to be our center point for the tree object. The trunk is what I'm saying. We want the trunk to be the foundation of our object. So what we're going to do is select all the objects that we want to be children of the trunk. In this case, we only have one. And then you select the trunk last. If you press Control P, this will allow you to parent it to the object. In this case, we're just going to do parent to object. Now, if I move this trunk, you can see that the rest of the tree goes with it, even though they're separate objects. If I move the top of the tree, it can move on its own because it's relative to the trunk. If I move the trunk again, you can see it moves both of them. So, in this case, you can see up here, we have the hierarchy has changed, that we now have the tree under the trunk. What we can do is right click on this and select hierarchy. That'll select everything that is a child of that object. And then we can shift duplicate that and move it as we please. That makes it much easier if you have very complex things that have many objects and you want to copy them. That's how you would do so. It defaults to adding a 0, 0, 1 or a 2 or whatever the next number would be after that when you create new objects like that. So now we have two trees in our scene, which is fantastic. We're going to press Alt-A to deselect, and let's just say that I want this scene to look a little bit cooler. So we're going to press Add Mesh, we're going to add a plane to get some ground in there, and you can see the shadows are already updating on it because we're in render mode. We're just going to add this plane, scale it up like I just did, translate it a little bit. Perfect. And then I'm going to add just the standard green material. Yeah, we'll do the standard green material there to make some ground. And now you can see we already have the beginning of a scene set up. So let's say we want to capture this scene. What we need to do is add a camera to the scene. You can see that this camera was added in the scene in the direction I was facing. So I was looking this way, and you can see now this camera's looking this way. It's not always the most efficient. So the way we want to be able to view through the camera is you can either go up here, View, Cameras, Active Camera, or you can see numpad 0. If you have a number pad on your keyboard, it's very easy to just press 0, and that'll bring you in. You can zoom in or zoom out, but it won't change the where the camera is. In order to do that, we need to go to View and lock camera onto View. Then when I scroll out, you can see that it has now locked the camera onto our view, and we can move around in the scene just like we did before and get this where we wanted it. So if I wanted to get these two trees in the scene like that, it's fantastic. Then we can click off of that, and if we move, then we can just move right out of the camera. And then if we press 0 again, it brings us right back to that spot. So, if we wanted to render this, we would press F12, and you didn't see the window pop up, but it'll pop up on your screen. Because it's a separate window for me, you don't see it. But it'll pop up with a new window that has your image in it. And then you can click on the top menu. There's a bar, and the image menu will have a save button. You can save your images, do whatever you need to with them. If you want to change the resolution, that's in this menu right here. You can see I'm rendering a 1920 by 1080 image at 100% fidelity, and this other stuff you don't need to worry about for now. So that's a simple way to create a scene with some very simple commands. We'll go into a few more in-depth procedures for modeling and lighting or texturing or materialization in the next video. So I hope you enjoyed, and please let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.